Charles understood from childhood that life in his homeland is not just a game with harsh rules, but an almost continuous struggle. He grew up in a small town where sand and heat were his constant companions, and hope for a better future seemed something far away and unattainable. The son of a simple farmer, he realized early on that it was pointless to wait for help from fate. His father always told him, "Life is not a fairy tale, son. No one will come to help. We are our own masters, and only work and strength will allow you to survive." Since then, Charles has lived that way with the idea that only hard work can make a difference. But no matter how hard he worked, there was never enough money. He took on any job that came to hand. He carried heavy bags in the market, worked part-time on construction sites, sometimes even helped on farms where fast labor was needed. Every day his life was like running in a circle. He got up at first light, spent the whole day at work, and returned home in the evening, exhausted and hungry. It was even hard for him to imagine that his life would ever change. But despite this, Charles dreamed. He, like many young guys, was looking not only for money or stability, but also for love. However, there was one big but in his way poverty. And every time he decided to approach the girl, this but became not just an obstacle, but almost a wall. One day, at the market where Charles worked as a loader, he again noticed one of the saleswomen, Mariam. She was a tall, slender girl with long pigtails and a sparkling smile that literally illuminated the grey everyday life of the market. Her voice was always melodious, and she could laugh so much that the sound seemed to drive away all problems. Charles could not resist, and in his spare moments was always somewhere nearby, hoping to accidentally meet her eyes or strike up a conversation. It seemed to him that here she was the one who would be able to see his real self, not paying attention to the money. But one day, after a particularly hard day, he decided to approach her directly. When he reached her counter, he smiled awkwardly.
"Hi, Mariam. How are you doing? Are there many customers today?"
Mariam looked at him, and her smile faded a little. She looked him up and down his worn work clothes, dirty shoes, tired face, and a shadow of doubt appeared in her eyes.
"Hello, Charles. Yes, it's fine. Is there something you want to buy?"
He was embarrassed. Of course, he didn't have any extra money to buy, but he hadn't planned on it either. He needed something else.
"Well, no, that's not what I'm after. I was just thinking maybe we could meet sometime. Have a drink together or go for a walk."
Mariam sighed without thinking twice. "Charles, I don't want to offend you, but you do realize that you and I are from different worlds, right? I'm working here to build my future, and you are. Well, you always work for someone. Do you have plans for your life? Stable job, car, house?" Charles lowered his head. Of course, he knew that he had neither a car nor a stable job. But does it really matter? Shouldn't relationships be based on other values?
I'm working on it. I'm trying. I could give you a lot, just not right now.
But her look said more than her words. There was a mixture of pity and misunderstanding in her eyes.
"Understand, Charles, you're a good guy. But I'm looking for someone with whom I can build a future. And you, well, I don't see the opportunities in you that I need. I'm sorry."
Charles felt his whole body go numb. He was refused again, and again for the same reason: money, future, stability. These words haunted him like shadows, becoming more and more heavy and suffocating. He returned home feeling drained. My father was at home that day, sitting at the table and fixing an old lamp.
"What's the matter with you, son? Why does your face look like you've been hit by a truck?"
Charles sank into a chair, staring into space.
"She turned me down again, Dad. Mariam. She said I wasn't right for her because I didn't have money, stability."
The father looked at his son with understanding. He was an old man who had been through a lot in his life, and his words always sounded like the wisdom of the ages.
"Son, women often choose someone who can provide for them. It's not bad or good, it's life. But you have to understand that money is not the main thing. Yes, you don't have them now, but if you keep working, if you keep working, if you keep looking for your way, then one day everything will change. Or maybe a woman will appear who will appreciate not your wallet, but your heart.
But Charles wasn't sure about those words. He had received too many rejections, had heard the same thing too many times, "You're a good guy," but bothered him. It seemed to him that the whole world was against him, that money decided everything. And although deep down he wanted to believe his father's words, the reality was too cruel. Several months have passed and nothing has changed. Charles continued to work in the market, taking odd jobs, but the girls avoided him. Even those who initially showed interest in him quickly lost it after learning about his plight. One day, when he tried to approach Cassandra again, a local beauty who works in a store, he was met with the same cold refusal. He walked over to the counter where she was standing, hoping he'd have better luck this time.
Hello, Cassandra. How are you doing?
She gave him a quick glance and returned her attention to her task.
Hello, Charles. Did you want to buy something?
No, I was just thinking. Maybe we could meet sometime. Have a drink. She raised her head, narrowing her eyes as if she couldn't believe her ears.
Charles, are you serious? Do you think I'm going to agree to go on a date with a guy who doesn't even have a proper job and money? You know I have other plans for my life, right?
His heart ached again, but this time he already knew what he was going to say.
Yes, I know. But maybe one day everything will change.
She laughed, a laugh that pierced him like a knife.
Well, when you get rich, come. Maybe then I'll think about it.
With that, she turned around and left. Charles was alone again. Charles was a guy with a kind heart, but as it turned out, that wasn't enough. He did not understand why sincere intentions and caring for a person did not matter in this cruel world. After all, it seemed to him that the main thing in a relationship was love, not money. But whenever he tried to have a relationship, the world reminded him that he was wrong. The women in his city were looking for stability, comfort, not sincerity and simplicity. Charles was slowly but surely beginning to doubt that he would ever meet the one. One of the first disappointments for Charles was a girl named Monica. She was beautiful and funny, and when they accidentally bumped into each other at the market, he felt that this might be a chance. They exchanged a few words, and it seemed to Charles that Monica really showed interest in him. He saw the warmth in her eyes, and finally decided to ask her out on a date.
Monica, I would like to invite you to dinner. What do you think? We could have a good time.
She looked at him with a slight smile, but there was a shadow of doubt in her eyes.
Charles, that's nice of you, but I heard you're not doing well with money. You understand that relationships are a responsibility, and I'm looking for someone who can take care of the future. You're a good guy, but I'm not sure you can offer me the life I dream of.
Her words stabbed into his heart like a blade. It was the first refusal that so vividly highlighted his financial failure. He nodded, hiding his resentment, and let her go, realizing that it was about money again. But that was just the beginning. The next girl he decided to approach was Anita. She worked as a waitress in a small cafe, where Charles sometimes went after work to have a cup of coffee. Anita always smiled at him, and he felt that maybe this time it would be different. Gathering his courage, one day he waited until the cafe was empty and approached her.
Hi, Anita. I've been thinking about it for a long time, and now I've decided. I would like to know if you would like to go to the cinema with me sometime or just take a walk.
She laughed, clearly embarrassed by his suggestion.
Charles, this is so unexpected. But tell me honestly, you probably don't have much money, do you? You and I both know that I'm not working here for wealth, and to be honest, I'm looking for someone who can give me more than just walking around the city.
He felt that familiar chill in his chest again. Another girl, and the same thing again, money. He was already beginning to think that sincere relationships no longer existed in the world. With each new refusal, an increasing burden of self-doubt fell on his shoulders. Charles began to avoid mirrors. He did not want to see his reflection. He did not want to see himself as someone who always loses. The town where he lived was small, and rumors spread quickly. Gossip that Charles was trying to have a relationship, but was constantly rejected, spread through the streets like wildfire. His friends, who were already few in number, began to laugh at him. They didn't say anything to his face, but he could hear snatches of conversation behind his back.
I heard Charles was trying to hit on Anita again. I wonder when he'll realize that it's better for him to focus on work and not on these girls.
Yes, as much as possible. Yes, everyone knows that he is as poor as a mouse. Who needs him anyway?
These words cut him from the inside out, and every day he felt the gazes of passers-by on him, as if everyone knew about his failures. It seemed to him that the city began to laugh at him, as if his attempts to start a relationship were something ridiculous, stupid. Charles often wondered why it was like this. Why doesn't his kindness and honesty matter? Why is it only important how much money he has? Every evening when he returned home, he felt that his life was turning into an endless cycle of rejections and disappointments. Gradually, the accumulated resentment and bitterness began to flood his heart, and he increasingly wondered, is there even a woman in the world who can see in him not only a poor worker, but also a man with a heart? Time passed, but nothing changed. His attempts to have a relationship continued to fail. Charles began to avoid meeting women, because he knew how it would end. One day, passing by a group of girls, he heard them laughing, glancing at him. He sensed that they were talking about him, although he couldn't make out the words, and it finished him off completely. He didn't want to be the object of ridicule anymore. Charles began to withdraw into himself. He stopped going to places where he usually spent time with friends or could meet new people. It seemed to him that the whole world was against him, and there was no way out. His failures in relationships also affected his work. He became less active, worked without the same enthusiasm, and in the evenings he was drawn to only one thing home to hide from everyone and everything. But the real blow for Charles was the case of a girl named Layla. She was new to their town, and Charles saw this as a chance. She didn't know about his poverty yet, didn't know about his reputation as a guy who gets rejected. It was a chance to start from scratch. Layla was educated, sweet and, at first glance, did not care about material goods. Charles felt that things might be different with her. After several weeks of general conversations, he finally decided to ask her out on a date. They met in a cafe, and at first everything went well. Layla listened attentively to his stories about life, about work, about how he was trying to survive in this harsh world. But when the conversation turned to the future, Layla asked a question that made Charles face reality again.
Charles, what are your plans for the future? You're working temporarily, aren't you?
Charles felt a familiar heaviness in his chest, but this time he decided to speak directly.
Yes, the job is temporary, but I'm trying. I hope that one day I will be able to earn enough to open my own business, or maybe go to another city where there are more opportunities.
Layla nodded, but there was no longer the same interest in her eyes. She smiled softly and said softly, "You are a very good person, Charles. But it seems to me that our paths are different. I am looking for stability and confidence in the future. I want a family, a home, and to be honest, I'm not sure that you will be able to give it in the near future. I'm sorry." Charles was hit again, and it was hard to recover from it. Layla got up and left, leaving him alone at the table. He sat in an empty cafe, feeling all his dreams and hopes slowly spreading like sand through his fingers. Another rejection, another disappointment. Charles got up slowly and went outside. Around him was his hometown, where he had lived all his life, but now it seemed alien and hostile to him. The city laughed at him, people looked at him with mockery, and Charles felt like he had become an outcast in his own home. He headed home, feeling that now he had only one thing as work. He couldn't earn any love or respect. Just work, day after day, without end. But there was still a tiny glimmer of hope in the depths of his soul. Maybe someday his life will change. Maybe all he needs is just patience and the strength to keep going forward despite all the setbacks. After another refusal, Charles felt fatigue finally take over his soul. His heart could no longer withstand the blows of fate, and it seemed that the whole world was against him. Every day was like the previous one: work, attempts to improve his life, another rejection and ridicule from those who considered him unworthy. At every step he faced the same thing: people saw nothing in him but poverty. In their eyes he always remained what he was: a simple worker who would never have any money or prospects. Charles began to think more and more often that his life had reached a dead end. Every day, when he looked in the mirror, he saw a man who had lost all hope. His attempts to build a relationship ended in failure, and it began to destroy him from the inside. But one day something changed. Perhaps it was accumulated disappointment or an unbearable sense of humiliation. But Charles realized that he could not continue like this. He was tired of being the object of pity and ridicule. He is tired of living in a world where he is judged only by the thickness of his wallet. One cold evening, when he returned home after another hard day's work, Charles sat in a dark room for a long time, thinking about his life. A fire was burning inside him, which had previously been only a weak ember. At that moment, he made a decision: he would no longer tolerate this existence. He will change his life, no matter how difficult it may be. Charles decided that it was time to leave the city, which had become for him only a source of pain and humiliation. He recalled people's stories about big cities, about the opportunities that open up there for those who are ready to work. He knew that many people went to the capital to try to get rich, and although not everyone succeeded, those who worked tirelessly often returned home with money. Charles realized that this was his chance. He will no longer live in self-pity and expect mercy from fate. He will go to a place where you can change your life, where people value work, not just money. Leaving for the big city was not an easy decision. It meant leaving everything he knew, abandoning his home, his family, and plunging into the unknown. But this time, the fear of the unknown could not stop him. He had nothing left to lose, and the thought arose in his heart that there, in another place, something more awaited him than endless rejections and disappointments. When he informed his father of his decision, he only nodded silently. The old man knew that Charles had been struggling for a long time in search of a better life, and he understood that this day would come sooner or later. They both understood that for Charles to stay in this city was to accept the fate of a loser, and this was not what his son deserved. After collecting some money, Charles bought a bus ticket that would take him to the big city. As he left, he felt a mixture of fear and determination. He knew that difficulties were ahead of him, but he was no longer afraid of the future. He was ready to accept all the trials that would befall him and do everything possible to change his life. The city greeted him with noise and chaos. Everything was different here: the people, the streets, the buildings. Everything seemed huge and restless, and for the first time Charles felt that he was in a world that never sleeps. But despite all his fears, he knew why he had come here. He had a hard time in the first few weeks. He looked for any job, spent the night in cheap hostels, sometimes even on the street when there was not enough money. The city was not hospitable, but it did not break him. He worked day and night, trying to earn at least some money to rent a small room and find a permanent place. Soon he was lucky: he found a job at a construction site. It wasn't the most prestigious job, but it gave him a steady income and the opportunity to catch his breath a little. However, Charles did not want to stop there. He knew that working on a construction site would not lead him to his dream, and began to look for opportunities for growth. In the evenings, after a hard day, he went to an internet cafe, where he studied everything he could find about business, investments, and earning opportunities. Gradually, he began to realize that the world was much bigger than the one he knew in his small town. Here, in the big city, the doors opened for those who were willing to learn and take risks. After several months of working on a construction site, he saved enough money to take business management courses. It wasn't easy to study in the evenings after work, but Charles was determined. He knew that this was the only way he could rise higher, the only way he could build the future he dreamed of. The courses gave him not only knowledge, but also confidence that he could achieve more. He began to plan his future and was no longer afraid to dream of more. Over time, Charles found an opportunity to invest his savings in a small business. He started with the little things he invested in a small grocery store, which was located on the outskirts of the city. It was a risky move, but Charles believed in himself. He worked tirelessly, helping with the management of the store, doing accounting and marketing. He learned how to run a business, make decisions and cope with difficulties. The shop began to make a profit. Charles did not spend money on entertainment or expensive things. He invested every cent he earned back into the business. Gradually, the store expanded, and Charles was able to open several more outlets around the city. He became an entrepreneur, a man who started from scratch, but thanks to his perseverance and hard work, he was able to succeed. A few years have passed, and Charles has turned into a man who could not even be thought of in his hometown. Now he had his own business, a chain of stores that brought stable profits. He was no longer the poor guy who was rejected by women because of his poverty. Charles became successful, but it didn't change him for the worse. He was still humble and hardworking, but now no one could call him a loser. One day, when he was sitting in his office, Charles realized that it was time to return home. He thought about it for a long time. He didn't want his return to seem like a demonstration of success, but deep down he felt that he had to come back, if only to prove to himself that he could change his life. He bought a black Range Rover, a symbol of his success and independence, and went to his hometown. As Charles drove into the familiar streets, he felt the memories rush back to him. It was the same city where his life had once been full of suffering and disappointment, but now everything had changed. People who once laughed at him looked at him with surprise and even admiration. Everyone knew that Charles had left, but no one expected him to return as such a man. Now his financial situation spoke for itself. Charles was successful, and his outlook on life changed. He was no longer the guy who depended on the opinions of others. Now he was building his own future, and no one could stop him. Returning home was not only a symbol of success for him, but also a confirmation that he was able to overcome all difficulties and change his fate. After returning to his hometown, Charles felt like a completely different person. That young man who once experienced incessant disappointment and humiliation has now turned into a mature and confident man. The years spent in another city, hard work and determination have changed him not only externally, but also internally. The business he managed to build from scratch gave him not only financial freedom, but also a deep understanding of life and people. Now, as Charles drove through the streets in his shiny Range Rover, he noticed the stares that followed him. People recognized him, though not immediately. At first they saw only an expensive car, elegant clothes and confident posture, but then they began to recognize facial features. "It's Charles!" exclamations could be heard. People in his hometown have always loved to gossip, and Charles's appearance became a sensation. Someone remembered him as a poor guy who could barely make ends meet. Someone recalled how he was mocked when he tried to have relationships with girls who eventually rejected him. And now they saw a successful man in front of them, to whom life had finally turned its face. However, Charles himself did not feel schadenfreude. He didn't need confirmation of his success through other people's admiring glances or whispers behind his back. Yes, he has changed, but has he become happier? Even before returning to his hometown, Charles began to realize that money and status are not the things that bring real satisfaction. Yes, now he had everything he had ever dreamed of. He could afford a luxurious life, travel the world, visit the best restaurants and wear expensive clothes. but his heart was still empty. Now that he had achieved financial success, he faced a new problem: how to find the very woman who will see in him not only his money, but also his true self. The irony was that now that he was rich, the women who had rejected him before suddenly began to show interest in him. The same circle of girls who had once looked down on him now smiled at him, winked, and seemed ready to make any sacrifice to attract his attention. But Charles had seen through them for a long time. One of the first people to approach him after his return was Cassandra, the same Cassandra who once laughed at his attempts to ask her out, looking at his shabby clothes. She was completely different now. Dressed in a bright dress that accentuated her figure, with a wide smile on her face, she confidently approached him at one of the city parties. She exclaimed with false joy, overplaying her emotions. "Charles, I just can't believe it. You've changed so much. You look amazing. What's up? What have you been doing all this time?" Charles looked at her and thought for a moment. Previously, these words could have warmed his heart. He would have believed that he had finally attracted her attention. But now he saw that there was nothing sincere in her gaze. She saw only his success, money, and status. Charles smiled back, but there was no naivety in his eyes that he had once looked at women with. And so it was with everyone. Girls who had previously ignored him or mocked his attempts to have a relationship with them now suddenly showed concern and interest. They openly flirted with him, invited him to meetings, complimented him, and tried in every possible way to appear attractive in his eyes. But Charles understood that their interest was far from true love. For them, he was just a symbol of success, an opportunity to improve their own lives. He saw it in their every move, in their every look. Time passed, and Charles began to move away from the circle of people. His aversion to falsehood grew every day. He couldn't understand why, with money and status, it became so difficult for him to find a real relationship. He remembered the times when girls looked down on him because of his poverty, and realized that the essence had not changed. Now they looked up at him, but again they did not see him as a person. They only saw his condition. He was no longer a naive young man who believed that love could be found on every corner. Money has not only made it easier to find a real relationship, but it has also made it even more difficult. One of the highlights that helped Charles finally get rid of his illusions occurred when he accidentally met Monica. She was one of the first girls to turn him down in the past. Once she openly told him that she needed a man with money, with prospects, with the ability to secure her future. Now she saw the same Charles in front of her, but completely different, rich and successful. Monica came up to him with a big smile, as if they were old friends, and began to have a conversation with him, as if she had forgotten all those hurtful words that she had said to him in the past. But Charles remembered everything. He saw her eyes light up at the sight of his car, his expensive watches and clothes. Her interest was obvious. She was looking for an opportunity to arrange her life through him. But Charles was no longer the naive boy who believed in beautiful words. He said goodbye to her without making any promises. Over time, Charles realized that his relationship with others had changed completely. Those people who once looked at him with contempt now sought his approval. They respected him not for his personal qualities, but for his achievements. This became his new environment: people who were ready to do anything for the sake of profit and status, but who did not see the real person behind all these symbols of success. Charles, despite becoming rich and successful, began to feel increasingly lonely. Money brought him independence, gave him the opportunity to change his life, but did not fill the void that remained in his heart. He realized that the love he had been looking for so long had nothing to do with material goods. And now that he could get any woman, he didn't want to play these games anymore. He needed more than just a pretty face and feigned admiration. He began to distance himself from all those women who had rejected him before, and from those who were now trying to attract his attention. Charles was not a vindictive man, but there was a growing conviction inside him that he deserved something better. He deserves to be loved not for the money, but for who he really is. and this realization became the key for him. Every day he became more and more involved in his business and personal interests. Success gave him the opportunity to do what he really liked. He started helping young entrepreneurs, invested in new projects, and supported charitable initiatives. He wanted to make the world a little better, to use his money to help those who, like him, once fought for their place in the sun. Charles realized that his relationship with others had now changed forever. He no longer had any illusions about how people treated him. He accepted the fact that many of them see him only as a symbol of success and opportunity. But it didn't bother him as much as it used to. Charles had grown up as a person, and now he was interested only in those people who appreciated him not for the external attributes of wealth, but for his inner qualities. He knew that such people existed, and he was ready to wait until he found those who could see in him not only a successful businessman, but also a man with a kind heart, the way he always was. As the years passed, Charles became even more successful and influential. But despite all this success, his heart remained open to a real relationship. He learned to appreciate loneliness and no longer sought approval from the women who had once rejected him. Now he knew that love and respect could not be bought, and he was ready to wait for someone who would see him as a man, not his wealth. Charles's life in recent years has turned into a series of successes mixed with loneliness. Despite the wealth and recognition he had achieved, there was still a void in his heart that neither money nor status could fill. The women who had rejected him before were now trying to get his attention, but Charles saw in them only a desire to improve their lives at his expense. He had long ago learned to understand people and no longer had any illusions about the motives of most of them. Every day he became more and more immersed in his work and his projects, leaving his personal life in the background. It has been several years since Charles returned to his hometown. His business flourished, he became a famous and influential man, but his heart remained closed to love. Ever since he was faced with a flood of fake smiles and false promises, Charles has stopped trusting people. It was hard for him to believe that anyone could really love him without looking at his condition. He no longer tried to look for a relationship, because with each new acquaintance everything was repeated. People saw in him only his money. And then one day, when, as usual, he was busy with his own affairs, fate decided to take an unexpected turn. It was an ordinary day, unremarkable. Charles decided to go to a small suburb to take a little break from work and spend time in a relaxed atmosphere. He liked to go out of town, where he could take a break from the noise of the big city and enjoy nature. There, among the green fields and ancient streets, he always found peace, which was so lacking in his busy life. Walking along one of the streets, Charles came across a small cafe. It was a cozy place, located off the main roads, and it immediately attracted his attention. Tired of the long walk, he decided to come in and have a cup of coffee. Inside the cafe, there was a calm and homely atmosphere: upholstered chairs, wooden tables, light curtains letting in sunlight. There were few people inside, and Charles felt that this place was ideal for forgetting all worries for a few hours. He sat down at a table by the window and ordered. While enjoying the view outside the window, Charles did not immediately notice the girl who was serving visitors. She walked past his table with a slight smile, and his attention was involuntarily attracted by her simplicity and naturalness. She was a young woman with delicate features, dark curly hair, and a warmth in her eyes that was far from the forced artificiality to which he was already accustomed in the big city. She worked in a cafe, obviously an ordinary waitress, and didn't seem to know who was sitting in front of her. To her, Charles was just another customer, a man who decided to have coffee at her establishment. Her behavior did not betray the slightest hint of a desire to impress or win his favor. This was completely new to Charles. He was used to people, especially women, seeing his expensive clothes and status attributes, trying to immediately attract his attention. But here it was different. Her name was Amalia, and she wasn't like any of the women Charles had come across lately. Amalia lived a simple life, worked in a cafe, helped her parents, and apparently was far from all the glitter and lies that others were used to. She was not interested in money, she was interested in something else: communication, warmth and sincerity. Charles was immediately hooked on this. Amalia walked over to his table with a tray and put a cup of coffee in front of him, smiling. Her smile was not the one he had seen before, fake, forced, just to please. There was a real kindness and simplicity in that smile, which was so lacking in his surroundings. Charles felt something new, an almost forgotten feeling of calm and warmth. For the first time in a long time, he felt that this was a man who was not looking at him through the prism of his wealth. Over the next few days, Charles returned to this small cafe more and more often. He was looking for an excuse to see Amalia again, but he didn't know how to approach her. He was afraid that she would find out about his wealth and change her attitude, as she had done many times before. But with each new visit, he realized that Amalia remained the same simple, kind and sincere. She talked to him as if he were an ordinary visitor, without hinting at her interest in his money. Charles began to spend more and more time in this cafe, trying to learn more about Amalia. She told him about her life, about her family, about how she loves this place, and how she likes to communicate with people. Charles listened to her with genuine interest. It had been a long time since he had felt so easy to communicate. He didn't have to hide his identity or try to appear like someone else in order to be liked. He could be himself, and it was surprisingly refreshing for him. With each passing day, Charles became more and more aware that Amalia was something special. In her eyes, he saw not only simplicity, but also a depth that he had so rarely seen in other people. Her concern for her loved ones, her sincerity and openness was something new to him. She wasn't trying to get his attention, and that made her even more attractive in his eyes. Gradually, Charles began to take care of her, but he did it carefully, trying not to advertise his wealth. He didn't want money to become the reason for her interest again. It was important to him that Amalia saw him as a person, not a successful businessman. He invited her for walks. They walked together through the quiet streets of the city, talking about life and dreams. Amalia talked about how she dreams of one day opening her own small cafe, where everything will be done with love and care for people. These dreams of hers touched Charles to the depths of his soul. He saw that in front of him was not just a girl, but a man with a big heart, capable of giving warmth and care. As time went on, Charles became more and more attached to Amalia. He had never felt such sincere affection before. It was not like his previous hobbies, when he liked just the external charm of a woman. There was something more here, the feeling that he had found a person with whom he could be truly happy. Charles began to seriously think that Amalia could become the very woman he had been looking for so long. But there was still apprehension inside him. What would happen if she found out about his condition? Won't her attitude change? Won't money become the reason for her interest again? These thoughts haunted him. Charles wanted Amalia to love him for his soul, for who he really was, not for his money and success. He was afraid that if the truth came out, everything would change. However, every day Charles became convinced that Amalia was not like the others. She remained true to herself, showed no interest in his financial situation, and continued to be the same sincere girl he met on his first day at the cafe. They spent more and more time together, and Charles felt that he had finally found the right woman, with whom he did not need to pretend. This relationship was a real discovery for Charles. He realized that he had found something real, something that money could not buy. It was a love that was built not on external attributes, but on trust, respect and sincerity. And although Charles was still hesitant to tell Amalia about his wealth, he felt that she would be able to accept him for who he was, even if the truth was revealed. As time went on, Charles and Amalia's relationship grew stronger every day. From the very beginning of their acquaintance, Charles realized that he had met not just a woman, but a man who was completely different from those he had encountered before. She did not know who he really was, did not know about his condition and success which he modestly hid. But this was exactly what Charles had been looking for so long. He has already experienced many disappointments, seeing how money and status turn even the most seemingly sincere relationship into a simple exchange of benefits. However, it was different with Amalia. Amalia lived in her own small world, full of caring for her family and the people around her. Her main goal in life was not wealth or luxury, like many other women Charles had once encountered. She aspired to a simple but important happiness for her family, a cozy home, and the warmth of human relations. It was more important to her than any material benefits. Charles saw how Amalia was genuinely happy about simple things: a sunny day, kind words, meetings with friends. She did not chase money, did not try to stand out through luxury or expensive things. Her inner value was in something else, that she was looking for joy in existence itself. For a long time, Charles hesitated to tell her the truth about his financial situation. He was afraid that after learning about his wealth, Amalia would change. It seemed to him that if she found out about his success, it would disrupt the harmony that they had built with her. He saw how in the past money broke trust and spoiled even the brightest relationships, turning people into slaves of their material desires. However, every day he became more and more convinced that Amalia was exactly the person who would be able to accept him for who he was, regardless of his condition. Every day spent with her strengthened his confidence that the love he had been looking for so long had finally found its place in his heart. Charles felt like he could be himself now. There was no need to prove or hide anything around Amalia. She saw in him not a rich man, not a successful entrepreneur, but an ordinary man who, like her, aspires to simple human happiness. Charles recalled his past relationships and compared them with what he was experiencing now. He realized that his former attempts to win love were always connected with the fact that people saw in him not himself, but his potential. Even before he became rich, many rejected him precisely because he could not provide them with the standard of living they sought. When he got rich, everything turned upside down. People started looking for his company, but all this was just a superficial attraction to his money. The women with whom he tried to build relationships after his success saw him not as a man, but as his status. It wasn't real love. However, with Amalia, everything turned out to be completely different. She wasn't interested in his wealth, and that was a real relief to Charles. Now that he could afford almost anything, his heart wanted only one thing: to be loved for who he was, not for what he had. Amalia gave him that feeling. She saw him as a real person, with his joys and worries, and that made their relationship special. Everything they did together was filled with sincerity and simplicity. They spent their time away from the luxury and noise of the city. Instead of expensive restaurants and high-profile events, they preferred nature walks, conversations about life, dreams and the future. These were the moments that strengthened their bond, and Charles felt each time that this was exactly what he had been missing for so long. The moment came when Charles realized that he could no longer hide the truth. He felt that if he wanted to build a real, honest relationship with Amalia, he had to tell her about his financial situation. But even then, when making this decision, he was not afraid of her reaction. Deep down, he was sure that Amalia would accept him for who he was, regardless of whether he was rich or poor. Charles chose the moment when they were sitting together on the shore of a small lake, not far from the city. The sun was setting, and golden rays illuminated their faces. The atmosphere was calm and warm, like their relationship. That was the moment when he realized it was time to open up. As Charles told Amalia his story, he looked at her face and saw that she was listening intently. He told her about everything: how long he had been fighting for his place in this world, how he had become rich, how his condition had changed his life and attitude towards people. He wasn't trying to embellish his story, he was just being honest as is. And when he finished, there was a strange feeling of relief in his heart. He wasn't hiding anything from her anymore. But the most amazing thing was how Amalia reacted to his confession. She hasn't changed for a second. There was no surprise or eager interest on her face. She just nodded calmly and said it didn't matter to her. All that mattered to her was the kind of person Charles was. She appreciated him for his kindness, care, and sincerity, not for his money. This moment was a turning point for Charles. He was finally convinced that he had found the very woman he had been looking for all his life. The love that could not be bought turned out to be a reality. Amalia accepted him for who he is, without regard to his financial situation. She loved him for his inner qualities, for his strength and kindness, for the kind of person he became after going through all the trials. Charles realized that all this time his pursuit of wealth and success was just an attempt to compensate for the emptiness in his soul. Money gave him freedom and independence, but it did not bring him what he really wanted: sincere and true love. Now, next to Amalia, he finally felt that he had found what he had been looking for so long. Their relationship became even stronger after that confession. Charles no longer felt the need to hide anything from Amalia, and this allowed them both to enjoy each other without unnecessary barriers. He was free from the fears and doubts that had plagued him earlier. Now he knew that he was loved not for the money, but for the person he had become. They continued to build their lives together. Charles supported Amalia in her dreams and helped her open her own cafe, which she had dreamed of for so long. But he didn't use his money as a tool to win her love. They worked together on this project, investing not only finances, but also their soul. This cafe became a symbol of their relationship, a place where sincerity, comfort, and kindness reigned supreme. Charles knew that he had found something more than just love. He found a connection that does not depend on material goods. Their relationship was built on trust, respect, and support for each other. And although Charles had every opportunity to surround Amalia with luxury, they preferred to live modestly, finding joy in simple things. And so, after years of searching and disappointment, Charles finally found the love that could not be bought. It was a love that did not depend on money, status items, or external gloss. It was a love built on real feelings, on respect and loyalty. Charles was happy now. Not because he had money, but because he had her Amalia, the one who loved him for the man he had become, not for what he had.